Jamie Schmale is the Member of Parliament for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock. And we're pretty sure that most people in Haliburton County have met Jamie at some point or another. But what you might not know is that prior to entering politics, Jamie attended Loyalist College and graduated from the radio broadcasting program. Jamie started his career as news anchor and news director for Chum Media. He's covered news, municipal politics, and sports for 91.9 in Lindsay. So you see, Jamie is an old radio guy. Thanks for joining us today, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to have you with us. And, you know, February the 13th is World Radio Day, a time to recognize and celebrate the medium. As someone who spent a number of years in radio news, both on air and as a news director, tell me what radio was like, in your opinion, back in those days.
Well, I like to think of myself as not that old, but the more I look at the calendar, the more reality is setting in. And thank you for that reminder, Mike. It's always good to be brought down to earth. Yes, when I started, local radio stations were a hive of activity. And that was really one of the things that brought me to radio and interested. I was always interested in news. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. And, you know, I have a face for radio, so TV was out. And, you know, some people pointed towards print for me because at that time newspapers were widely read, were widely considered the main source for news. But I also recognized the fact that it was also delayed, right? Because you had the breaking story, and then it was probably 28 or 24 hours or whatever time before the publication reached people's hands. By that time, it was stale. So radio was my direction, and I thought, yeah, you know what? I want to be a news anchor on radio, and I went for it. And of course, radio stations back then had full news departments, which is rare these days. Nowadays, you're lucky if you have one part-time person in the news department. It's basically a rip and read, which is really unfortunate. Maybe we can get into that a little later in this conversation. But I'd like the fact that the news was local, it was immediate, people knew where to go when something happened, especially well, internet was there, but it wasn't as popular. Not everyone had a cell phone. And again, I'm dating myself, and it makes me very sad. But you know, we knew we had jobs to do. We knew we took it seriously, and we knew the radio station was the place that the community knew and respected, and it had a great following. And I really attribute how I got here to radio as well. Right? I started as a journalist. Journalists actually had beats back then, if you can believe it. And sadly, no one wanted the political beat. And being the new person on the block, the news director at the time said, guess what? You're going into politics and you're covering City Hall, you're covering provincial, federal. And that's what got me started in that. And here I am.
It's funny, Jamie, my career started pretty well the same way. I didn't get on air doing a regular music shift. I started in news and local politics, and also mobile news. This is long before cell phones and even computers. We used two-way radios to be on the scene and broadcast news from the location. There was an energy about radio in those days. Did you find that?
Absolutely. I found when you did on-location broadcasts, you brought the station van, you made a setup, and people would flock to you. It was amazing. You know, at that time we also gave out prizes, right? So come by this booth at this time and get a coffee mug or a hat, and it was kind of exciting, right? Like you were part of the community and you were out there, you were involved. So absolutely, and it's it brings back good memories, and also a place in my heart, which Canoe FM will always have, because one of my former professors, Dave Sovereign, was one of the founding members of Canoe FM, and it was great. And at that time, I was working with my predecessor, Barry DeVolen, and we got to work together as Canoe was getting off its feet. So it's a good news story all around, just to continue to be involved.
Yeah, great memory. And that reminds me, as you're talking there, that in the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of job losses as large media groups pare down to try and drive money to the bottom line. And this has put a lot of news people, as you say, out of jobs. And it is a real tragedy because it's one of the vital roles that radio can play. And I'm sure that you feel the same way, that one can hope that there will be a turnaround, whether it's at the local level, people start hiring into news departments because local news is so important these days.
That's actually one of the things I didn't really understand with some of these bigger companies buying all these smaller stations, right? It would be a more, and sometimes a centralized broadcast or canned content, so to speak. And it never really made sense to me because the reason people tuned into radio stations, especially in small towns, remote towns, was to get the local news. But in many cases, the news department was gutted, the announcing staff was gutted, and if you can get the same music elsewhere through satellite or the internet or something, I was like, what is drawing you to that local radio station? And my answer was always, well, really nothing, because unless you had like a live morning team that was connected in the community, maybe that was something to draw them to. In many cases, that's not the case anymore, right? It's done out of a central location and rebroadcast around. So there's not that connection anymore. And like to your previous question, when you get out in the community and radio stations being involved, radio was fun, right? It was entertainment. It was fun. People wanted to be around it. And that's, I think, some of the draw. And unfortunately, when you got, not you, but when the companies got rid of the staff, it stopped being fun. It just became robotic. And that's not interesting to many people. And I think that's unfortunately why radio stations are losing listeners, and unfortunately some are closing down.
Yeah, not a nice environment to be working in. And I'm sure for many professional radio people, it's a nervous time for them to see whether or not they have a job 2 months down the road. And thinking about all of this and all the things that we're going through today, with our climate change and with the strange weather patterns that we get, do you feel radio is still as relevant today as it was 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think there are more challenges, especially the fact that everyone's got a phone now, and social media is going very quickly in people's hands, and that information is getting there. But I also think that with that social media issue, there's often information out there that is incorrect, and I think that if you had a team of journalists at the radio station that were able to verify information and then broadcast reliable, true information, I think that does play a vital role.
Yeah, and thinking of what you just said, in the larger picture, we news junkies, and I'm one of those people, like for years, I've been avidly following any news source that I considered legitimate. But today I do it less because, particularly with online news, I don't trust it. I don't know the source. I don't know if what people are sharing is true. Where did it come from? And I think that's where local radio can really make a difference, as they report the news and it's people you trust on the other side of the microphone. That's got to be a real benefit to the general public.
Absolutely, and given the fact that many local newspapers have closed as well, many communities don't have a local TV station. It would be nice to get local news and find out where your town council's up to, or the general goings on in the community. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that's been taken away, and there isn't that same connection to community that we once had. And again, I don't want to date myself, but there's always a growing issue over the years that volunteering is getting finding volunteers is getting harder and harder, right? And I think this disconnection with community, it plays a role in that as well. And people are just not sure where to get information or where to go. So I think that plays a role. But again, radio brought people together, right? It was fun. You wanted to be there. You wanted to get involved, and it was a good time.
I was talking to Dave Charles the other day, and Dave used to be with 1050 Chum, and he's now a radio consultant and worked all over the world. And he was telling me a story about South Africa and how he helped put in a national radio system in the various provinces of South Africa. And he said in one area, the most popular program was a short program that aired every day, and it was a show that highlighted the jobs that were available in the community, because jobs were so hard to get. And he said it became the #1 show on radio. So there are these unique opportunities that radio can take advantage of if you put a little creativity to it and get some energy behind it. So perhaps radio is not only relevant today, but has a good future.
Well, I hope so. And I do notice that some of the bigger companies like the Bell Media and others are selling off some of their smaller stations and going back to smaller local ownership. And so I'm sitting in Lindsay, Ontario right now, and I know the local radio station that I once worked for has been sold by Bell. Which, in my opinion, completely gutted that station. And it's under a new ownership group, and that owns a few stations around Durham region and otherwise that have a more community feel or vision for the station, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to offer.
Well, Jamie, thanks for joining me today. This has been so nice to see you again, and we certainly are glad to celebrate World Radio Day on the 13th, and thank you for being a part of that celebration.
Thank you so much for thinking of me. Great to see you again.
Good to see you. Jamie Schmale is the Member of Parliament for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock and is a radio guy.